Hello, Patreon subscribers. Thank you so much for your patience with this bonus episode. This is a very hefty, chunky episode. I did a deep dive into what interviews, press coverage, and bios I could find online for Kathryn Falk, the founder of Romantic Times, both the magazine and the convention. And I organized them into this very hefty bonus episode. So thank you for your patience as I put this together. We start with her own account of her professional history from her bio and from interviews. We move on to media coverage, and then we end with commentary from people who knew her personally or professionally. I want to say a few things. First of all, trigger warning and content warning. Mentions of assault, workplace, physical, and sexual harassment are part of some of these stories. Thing two, do you have stories about Kathryn Falk? Do you remember working with her? Did you go to the conference? Do you have stories? I would really like to know because I find her a lot fascinating. And I really am curious, after you listen to this episode, what your impression is. You can find me in the Discord for the Patreon community. You can find me on the post on patreon.com for this entry. I would really love to hear what you think and what you think of the conclusions that we drew as well. I will link to everything. There are so many links. So many. Thank you for being part of the Patreon community. Your support means everything and enables me to do some weird episodes like this one. I hope you enjoy this bonus episode. On with the podcast. I have been doing some research and I am so excited to, I really thought that you might be like, I'm not really interested in hearing about this lady. I'm pretty sure Kathryn Falk might be the Forrest Gump of romance. And the reason this is behind a paywall is because she's still alive. I don't want to put this in the, look. You do not want to fuck with Kathryn Falk, so we're just going to put this behind the paywall. So what I have done is looked at every possible media reference that I can find about her, including stuff in the Wayback Machine.
Okay.
I found a Wayback Machine copy of her website and read her bio and then compared it to interviews and conversations that she's had. And then I found media coverage of her, some of which I've talked to you about before. But this is a wild ride. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to start by saying that when Smart Pitches started in 2005 and we started looking at Romantic Times and RWA and we were going to go to conferences, I kind of had a problem with RT as a magazine because I was like, these reviews are not helpful to me as a reader. And I was more cranky and snarky in my youth. I mean, I've aged and mellowed, I hope. But I did not like the very, very evident be nice culture at RT in the reviews. And I was like, this is not useful to me. This is not helpful. What the hell is this? And I had an editor pull me aside and say point blank, do not mess with Kathryn Falk. Just don't. And I was like, this was 2006, 2007. I was in my early 30s. And, you're in your early 30s. Nobody can tell you shit, right?
Not even my mom.
Oh, yeah. If you're nobody's telling you shit. And back then, no one was telling me shit. So I was like, don't mess with Kathryn Falk. Why not? And they were like, just don't. Do not do it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I agree from my research at this time, you should not mess with Kathryn Falk. Hence, paywall. So she did an interview with a website called Writers in the Storm. This was back when every author had a blog, and tells the story of her life, which I compared this interview, all of this, of course, I will link to, and I compared this to the Wayback Machine copy of her bio on her website.
Look at this slew thing we have here.
The podcast You're Wrong About, where they do a deep dive into something? Yeah. So the fact is, the person who's pulled me aside, they were right about Kathryn Falk. This is You're Right About. Don't fuck
You're
with
right
her.
about.
You're right about this. Don't fuck with her. Okay. So what we're going to do, the structure is I'm going to share with you some of her bio and some of the quotes about her. And I'm going to share a little bit of the history of the conference. We're going to take a side trip into a documentary. And then we're going to talk about the New York Times article, which I have talked to you about. We have some quotes from that. And then we're going to talk about what authors have to say about her and what people have emailed you and me about her since we started this series. So we have what she says about herself, what the media has said about her, and then what other people have said to us about her. Now, I just want to make it clear that I have an enormous amount of respect for what she has accomplished. But again, don't fuck with her. For seriousness, do not. Okay. So Kathryn Falk In the beginning of her bio, it says that she started traveling to Europe in the late 60s. She was born in the U.S. And, quote, with her sister Suzanne in tow, they went to summer school in Switzerland in French-speaking Vaud, above Lac Léman, not far from Charlie Chaplin's house. On a flight to New York, she met Maximilian Schell, who was directing films in Hungary. Then she partied with the Maharaja of Baroda, who lived in London, went to Annabelle's nightclub, spent a memorable time. I don't know what a memorable time is, but I'm assuming euphemisms be euphemising. With Anthony Burgess, author of Clockwork Orange. I might not be saying that right. And drank incredibly expensive wine at the Dorchester Hotel. At her 29th birthday, she partied at Maxim's in Paris and met Zsa Gabor, and they chatted in French. Per her biography, she owns a farm in Texas where she lives right now. She has a farmhouse in Austria, a country house near Woodstock, a carriage house in Brooklyn, the whole village of Barrow, which is where Lady of Barrow comes from, in Suffolk, and a villa in Calabria in Italy.
That's so many properties. Like, I really don't understand the second home culture.
Well,
because
I mean,
I'm a nester. I accumulate things.
are you in your nest right now? Like you're surrounded by there's a blanket and some. Oh yeah, I'm a nester too. Oh yeah.
I cannot imagine having a second place to put shit. One and be like, oh, where is blah blah blah? Oh, it's at my other house. And two, like me being who I am, I would just be constantly paranoid that while I'm not living in this home for months at a time, what if it's burglarized, or we come home and a family of raccoons have taken up residence in my bedroom?
Nested. They wanted to nest.
They're nesting in my own nest.
So clearly we're talking about somebody who's got some money here. She's got some funds. Did you know that before she started RT, she was a famous miniature vendor? She ran a miniature and dollhouse furniture store in the 70s in New York called Mini Mundus, which is Latin for small world. She became known as the High Priestess of Miniatures, and a society columnist in the New York, I think it was New York Magazine, named Eleanor Lambert, labeled her the High Priestess of Miniatures. And then the New York Toy Fair industry fair, the whole toy industry show, asked her to set up miniature exhibitions at the toy fair. And there is still a miniature section of the toy fair to this day, if the convention is still going on.
Was she just a vendor, or did she make them as well?
I think she made them and bought them. There are a couple of very old books that she co-authored. One was about needlepoint for miniatures. One was about, finding and restoring miniatures. But if you look on old book sites, you'll find some of her titles about miniature furniture.
Okay.
So in the late 70s, she changed directions and started researching historical romance. And what she did was sat down and wrote letters to dozens of historical writers popular in the 70s, started collecting their profiles, collecting information, starting up a correspondence. And if you think about this was before email. You certainly weren't going to call these people because that was very expensive per minute. She just had an incredible correspondence with all of these authors and then started meeting them. Now, she started writing a book called Ladies of the Night, Knight, that was all about historical romance authors, even going back into 1800s, 1700s. But Pinnacle said, this chapter on 1970s authors that is happening right now, that's kind of cool. Can we have that? And can you make that into a book? And that became her first book called Love's Leading Ladies, which was all about 65 different romance authors. It was published on Valentine's Day, 1982.
This is a perfect example of a rich person finding a hobby or hobbies. If you look at Elon Musk, right?
Yeah.
Elon Musk is so rich and he can't leave well enough alone and just has to ruin everything because he doesn't have any fucking hobbies.
Yes.
Just get a hobby or several.
Yeah. I mean, look at Kathryn Falk. She's had 5. One of the things that she said several times in different bios and interviews was that, and this resonated with me, as you probably will expect, having written a book gave her the credibility to start the magazine. Now, I know that no one took Smart Bitches seriously until we'd published a book. All of a sudden, having the book made the site legitimate. So I completely understand for her, having written a book means the magazine has a legitimacy. She's already established herself as a printed expert. This part was very interesting. Glossy paper was very expensive, and she was typing this up on a typewriter and had a neighbor who would set up the publication for her. And back then, and I remember seeing this when I was really, really young, setting up a publication meant cutting it out with an X-Acto knife and gluing it to the master sheet, and then that would be reproduced at a printer. So she went to it was on newsprint. It was like a big tabloid newsprint, and it was from a printer that did dozens of ethnic newspapers all day and all night. So the print run would be at like 1 a.m. And before it would be like the Puerto Rican Weekly and the Russian Weekly and the Gay Advocate and the Chinese Daily Paper. And then like the Romantic Times. And all of these little tiny papers, which no longer exist, all ran through this one printing house. So we're already in like printing history, which I think is really neat. So she says that she discovered Fabio. She has said several times she discovered Fabio. What she actually did was saw him on the cover of an Avon book and was like, I am going to make this guy part of the convention. Then came Mr. Romance. The first Romantic Times newsletter that she created was published June 1981. And shortly after, she wrote another book called How to Write a Romance and Get It Published, which came out in 1981 or 1982. I found multiple dates. But it was really the first how to write book about romance of the modern era. And when that was published, she got a 4-page spread in People magazine. There were covers of the New York Daily News. She went on Good Morning America. She was on the Merv Griffin show. She was written up in syndication columns all over the country, the New York Times. And according to Kathryn, grain of salt, the updated edition sold over 100,000 copies. She also wrote, and I have an episode very soon about this with Steve Amadown, she published The Romance Reader's Handbook in 1989.
Look at that spiral bound.
Spiral bound. And what this is a guide to pseudonyms. So if you want to know someone's pseudonym, there's like 50 pages of pseudonyms in here. And then you have ads from authors. Like here's Virginia Henley's 1-page ad. So it's like a spiral bound pseudonym reference guide plus ads from like.
Where did you find that? Did you find?
I bought that on Libris. Babe, I bought this at a used bookstore. The other thing that is so interesting to me about this, because I mentioned she's been writing letters to authors and she's collecting all of these connections. This is basically like author-reader social media before social media. You would find everything you wanted to know about authors in this book. And there was supposed to be more than one of this, but there was just the one. In 1999, she was included in Time magazine's Tycoons of the Century. She has since gone on to say that RT was the first to recognize erotic romance, that she persuaded Walter Zacharias at Kensington to publish Black romances, that she was one of the ones who supported ebooks the earliest. According to Kathryn, in 2004, Romantic Times Magazine had over 150,000 subscribers. And if you remember, the conference and the magazine ended in 2018. The site went dark. It was supposed to be up for a year and it went dark much sooner. And there are very few remnants of the site online. It's it's gone. She now lives on an organic farm in Alvin, Texas, according to the archive version of her website. She has organic animals, farm, eggs, chickens. Like she's entirely self-sustaining. And her newer passion is a organization for veterans where she invites veterans to come and stay on her property and recuperate, and she raises money for them. So I think that's like her newer. Oh, and the longevity thing. She's a member of a bunch of different societies to try to live to 120. Listen, I'm approaching 50. I don't think I want to live to 120. Just right now is stressful. Can you imagine 120? No.
Yeah.
So
no, thank you. Here
is a little bit of history about the convention that I learned from, researching her bio. In 1982 was the first RT. It was a one-day conference at the St. Regis in New York. She invited publishers and agents to hold court in different suites and then gave attendees opportunities to discuss their manuscripts. There was an award ceremony, a date with a prince contest, seminars, and a book fair. And it was all one day. The second RT was at the Roosevelt. And I'm going to send you a quote from Kathryn Falk's biography. And I invite you to read this absolutely astonishing sentence. 2 sentences.
I sponsored a love train that went from California to New York, picking up readers and writers along the way. My roommate was Elsie Washington, author of the first Black romance, published by Ecstasy's editor Vivian Stephen, who founded RWA.
Kathryn's assertions about being like the foundation of Black romance, I know Steve Amadone is researching that right now, so I don't know how well that holds up, but that is a consistent element of her biography. Here is a description from the look.
I will say though that like, oh boy, the love train thing and my roommate was Elsie Washington, author of the first Black romance that was published by Vivian Stephen, feels very I have a Black friend.
Oh, that's 100% I have a Black friend, right? No question.
Yeah.
So I just pasted a second sentence, and this is also from her bio.
Yeah. This is where the heart roams. Women dressed in pink waited for us at every station. George Ciceri and his film crew were on board and made a movie called Where the Heart Roams. Is that Kathryn in that dress?
No, that's Barbara Cartland, the original grande dame of romance. Barbara Cartland came to the second Romantic Times because she was, of course, pen pal friends with Kathryn Falk. I'm telling you, this woman is like Forrest Gump in that sequence of where he's just bouncing around through history. Yeah, she was very, very good friends with Barbara Cartland and persuaded Barbara Cartland to come to the second RT. So the love train came in from California. Barbara came over from England, and they had a conference in New York.
I have a Google Alerts set up for Barbara Cartland because Barbara Cartland has such interesting merch. Like she has her cookbook. She has a board game, in case you guys didn't know.
Oh,
and she has a series of puzzles from her romances. And there's 4 different puzzles. I own 3 of the 4.
Amazing.
So I am desperately searching for the 4th puzzle. So I have like an alert set up so I can be ready to get it. I think I have, here's one of them. Oh my Waddington's puzzles. I have to put them together.
It's still wrapped in plastic.
Still sealed. I have to put it together, but
sealed in
there's
box.
The 4 on the back.
Wow. Oh, it's very watercolor people on horseback.
Yes. They have 3 of the 4.
You can rent it from Vimeo if you want to watch it. There's a 10-minute preview on WETA.org. But here is the description of the Where the Heart Roams documentary, starring Barbara Cartland and Janet Daly. Basically, they were being set up as the old guard and the new guard. And this is just wild to me. I read this and my jaw just dropped. Some not so famous romance writers and some would-be romance writers on a train. And what do you get? The love train, organized by romance author and fan Shelley Kitzmiller. Now, Kathryn's saying she sponsored it, but Shelley is apparently the one who organized it. This train ride took romance fans from LA to New York for a late 1980s romantic book lovers conference. As they travel cross-country, the women and a couple husbands discuss the business of romance novels. How explicit should the sex be? Should they wait until they're married? While Hunter S. Thompson biographer and Playgirl writer E. Jean Carroll grills them about what men and women want from each other. E. Jean Carroll, if you remember, just sued the fuck out of Donald Trump and won many, many millions of dollars. E. Jean Carroll, also apparently a very colorful life. She grills them about what men and women want from each other. This 80-minute documentary spotlights Kitzmiller's angst at not having written the book of her dreams and her growing confidence from organizing this public relations coup for the romance industry. There's a documentary about a train ride. Can you imagine a train full of romance authors now? Like back in the day, they used to organize, gosh, I can't remember the name of the company that did this. Oh, it's gonna come to me at like 3 a.m. I think it's something like Spencer or something. They would organize a bus tour of a bunch of authors and they would do all of these small bookstores. I think it was a small bookstore company. And they would go from city to city all together on this bus. And at one point, I remember after the site was started, so it was between 2005 and now, one of the authors was going to start blogging and everyone was like, you cannot talk about what happens on the bus. You cannot spill the tea about what is happening on the bus. Apparently, they get very saucy.
I mean, like, I love a train ride, but I only like a train ride if I'm by myself or like with one other person.
Yeah.
There's something
I would love to do
about
a train ride,
where, one, it's expensive. Yeah, I don't know if I want to do like a party train ride from LA to New York.
Mm-hmm. And that's
a lot.
There's a clip in the documentary of it might have been Elsie Washington reading aloud part of her book, and it's like a really erotic scene or something. Everyone's crowded around her, and I'm like, oh, all of this makes me uncomfortable. Now, I mentioned this New York Times article. This was published in 1996, a magazine for romance novels and the women who love them. And I am going to share with you the very casual attitude that we had towards human resources and how to talk about your employees to the media. Here we go. I'm going to drop a long, this is a bit of a wall of text, but the whole thing is incredible. Here we go.
Oh, boy. Okay. I'm assuming the she is Kathryn.
That's Kathryn. Yes, this is about Kathryn.
She gave a visitor a quick tour of Romantic Times magazine, from her display of erotic Chinese silk shoes a few inches long for bound feet, to an adjoining room in which editors were bent over computer screens. She settled in a back room that, with a pillowy couch and ruffled floral curtains, looked more like a Victorian parlor than an executive's office, and said of the copy editors she had just introduced, "They're all virgins. I tell them it's like having diabetics in the chocolate factory." Oh boy. How does she know? "Believe me," she said, "I know." Tara McCarthy, a 25-year-old self-described virgin who has written a memoir about her attempt to be both sexy and chaste, later called her boss's references to her colleagues' sexual status inaccurate, most notably in the case of a married editor with 2 children. When it comes to romance, Miss Falk has long been given to extravagant statements. Romance, after all, is her fortune. What the fuck?
Can you imagine the New York Times is doing a profile of your boss and she tells the reporter that everyone in the room is a virgin because she can tell? What is she, a historical romance hero who can sniff the virginity? What is that?
I mean, technically, we don't know if the children were birthed from that woman. She could technically still be a virgin.
Like diabetics in the chocolate factory. Oh, honey.
That's awful.
So this article, I will, of course, link to this in the show notes, but this article has a number of interesting, like, people will make a statement and then pull it back and then make a statement and pull it back. And you sort of get to see beneath the pink ruffled veneer of what's going on here. One of the quotes from that article is Kathryn just straight up saying, "And I love to make money." Well, I mean, who doesn't, girl? Yeah. So later on, the reporter starts talking to like Walter Zacharias from Kensington and Catherine Orr, who was a VP at Harlequin at the time, and an editor at Avon named Ellen Edwards. I will send you another quote from the article.
Many romance writers viewed Miss Falk as having the power to make or break a novel. For years, Romantic Times was the only place that would review their books. Some writers and editors are afraid of her, Walter Zacharias said. Through Romantic Times, readers could vicariously accompany Miss Falk on travels on which she had romantic encounters with British lords and an Indian Maharaja. They could ogle nearly naked men at her annual male beauty pageant.
So basically what they're saying here is that she's like a proto-influencer. You have Kathryn Falk creating this tabloid news magazine about your favorite romance genre, and she herself is setting up her life and her story as a romance heroine. I live in these beautiful places. I have all of these houses. I hang out with British lords. I am myself Lady of Barrow.
Could she really make or break a novel? That's the thing to me of like reading RT magazine, right? RT book reviews. There has never been a review that I have felt is particularly scathing to the point of like career ruining or novel ruining. All of their reviews are pretty middling. Or kind of saying nothing but like empty platitudes.
Right. It's very Midwestern nice. Like if you're talking about the decor in a restaurant, I'm supposed to infer that the food is bad.
Yeah. So I'm very curious if the make or break a novel feels more insidious in that she has all these connections. And if she doesn't like the novel, she could probably pull some strings and like fuck with your book deal.
The way I've heard it described, and I think Steve Amadone said this recently in the interview we did that I'm working on editing, she had pets, basically. She would pick an author and they would be her pet and she would talk about them all the time. And she was doing that with self-published authors at the end of Romantic Times. She would like want people to be in big featured placement that were just knew that she liked them. She had people that she championed and she had authors who were her group. And like some of them, I have quotes from some of them later. She definitely had favorites and she definitely promoted her favorites. But we also saw the amount of, Helen Rosberg and Medallion Press would buy a whole dinner and multiple covers and lots of articles, and they would do a lot of placement of Medallion books. I think Heather Graham and Kathryn Falk had a great relationship. Now, I also think that Heather Graham would have had the career she's had without Romantic Times. But again, like they said, this was the only place reviewing those books. So this really felt like the only outlet in town. And we also went through the same thing. Like people thought that, the site was too powerful and, we shouldn't have this kind of power to make or break a book. And I'm like, no one has ever began or ended a career because of something our site has said. Like we don't have that much power. And I don't know that RT ever did. She just had favorites that you would hear a lot about. Now, Catherine Orr from Harlequin at the time said that the draw for the community was not the magazine, it was Catherine. She was the phenomenal promoter. She created this cult of personality around the magazine and then the convention because it was also her show. And then we have some people who say on the record to the New York Times, questioning the credibility.
Some editors question the credibility of Romantic Times because they say it offers good press to writers who buy ads and either ignores or pans writers who do not. Ellen Edwards, Avon Books' editor for romance, said of writers who advertise in Romantic Times, "They're afraid, and I've seen instances of retaliation. Romantic Times does not let ad sales influence its reviews or articles," says Carol Stacey, the magazine's publisher. "Never," she said. Press X to doubt on that one.
There were accounts.
I think we talked about this recently too, of like, that like, editors were never swayed by, they didn't have prior knowledge of who was advertising in that issue, which could be a true statement, but it also could be that they had a running list of people they know to give favorable reviews to, like Catherine's friends, or like even the bad reviews in RT aren't bad. Like they tell you nothing. So maybe they just have a rule of like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. And if you do say it, make it as vague and watery as possible.
I don't think a pan an RT was going to do all that much, but also the things that they gave low stars to, you don't know why. It doesn't say.
Yeah.
Then there were other, in this New York Times article, accounts of violence.
Oh boy. Oh no.
Okay, so here is one account of violence. Again, this is from the New York Times. I'm presuming they fact check this.
"The spectacles that she has created rival even her male beauty pageant. 2 years ago, at the Romantic Times convention in Nashville, among hundreds of conventioneers, she hit Charlene Keel, a former employee, with her fists. Miss Keel was beaten badly enough that she had to be taken to a hospital by ambulance. Miss Keel had been buttonholing conventioneers to promote her rival magazine, Miss Falk said. "I defend my turf," she said. Ms. Keel, who did not file charges, said recently, "I am willing to extend the olive branch. She's temperamental, but brilliant."
Now, how many times have you heard that language used to describe some abusive CEO dude? Right? Like there's behavior that gets pardoned, but I've also worked for people that like do things like this, and it's like, oh, this is not good. And then we have, again, in the New York Times.
At another convention, she threw handfuls of books at an employee who insisted on taking a lunch break. "She shoved me up against the wall," said the employee, Michael J. Powazanik, who said it was especially important that he eat because he is diabetic. "But like Miss Keel, he is forgiving. That's just the character she was and is," he said. Colorful. Also, the fact that he's a diabetic and then the comment she made about diabetics
in the chocolate factory. Yeah. Okay. Now, Michael, Jesus. I don't know how to say that name either. It's either Powaznik or I'm guessing here. He passed away in 2008. And at the RWA New York City chapter memorial page, they described him as, quote, "Michael will be best remembered for his exuberance." But he also started a rival magazine. And I think it ran for 2 or 3 years before it folded. So here's one last quote from the New York Times.
Like the author of a heated romance, she seems to want to improve on the dullness of ordinary life. If the drama is not there, she will drum it up. She can create high-pitched moments at an office preoccupied with proofreading.
At the end of the article, they talk about a birthday party for one of the copy editors, and she gives, like in front of everyone in the office, a cake and then some lingerie, a bra and some gold panties in front of a New York Times reporter and in the front of the whole office. And I'm like, wow, I would be so uncomfortable.
And as someone who has worked like literally my desk next to proofreaders, they got to concentrate.
They're busy.
They don't need to be preoccupied with your shenanigans.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that was the New York Times article. And that sort of is the end of what I found about her biography and what has been written about her in the media. A lot of it is this sort of portrayal of this temperamental, volatile, larger than life character who apparently also commits assault if you get on her turf. Again, an editor did pull me aside and say, "Do not fuck with her." And I understand why. So this section is what people have told me or us about Kathryn Falk. Do you remember the ad from Diana Palmer that we talked about where she was like, "I'm not attending RT in Nashville. And if anybody says they're representing me,
they're my sister, that's not true."
That's not true. So I sent that to a friend of mine and I was like, "Can you believe this?" And I told you this when we were talking in the last episode, that she would just arbitrarily publish info saying that authors were attending RT when they had not confirmed that. And they would be so pissed, but they would just give in and come. But then, I haven't found this ad yet. I'm still looking. 1 or 2 authors took out ads in the Romantic Times magazine, basically saying, "Kathryn Falk's a big old liar, and no, they're not coming." Amanda's face right now, like eyes wide, mouth open, like, wow.
I can't tell. Like, yeah, that's petty, but also you're giving her money.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about that move.
Yep. So this next part is a mixture of something that I've already talked to you about, the Time magazine article from the late 90s, "Crazy and in Charge, Brilliant Tycoons Have a Tendency to Get Eccentric." So this person also wrote to me and said, "You know about the chicken she bought to Baton Rouge, right?" And I was like, "Wait, chicken?" No. So in the Time magazine article, there's a little paragraph about Kathryn. And let's see. During a 1997 Romantic Times convention in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as hundreds of lady authors, would-be authors, and romance novel lovers milled about, Lady Barrow, she bought herself an English title, regally strolled the floor, greeting fans, eager to not just meet her, but also pet the chicken that perched on her shoulder. Truly, she swoons all the way to the bank. So I grabbed that and I sent it to my friend and I was like, this is the chicken? And she said, yes. She walked around the whole convention with the chicken on her shoulder, but it was not a chicken. It was a rooster. And according to someone who roomed next door to Kathryn, the rooster crowed in the morning at dark 30, and this person wanted to murder the rooster. Apparently, it was Kathryn's father's emotional support rooster because he had dementia. So she claimed. My friend said, now why she thought an RT convention would be a really good place for someone with dementia is a mystery. And ended it with, bless.
Wait, so did she bring her father?
Yes, to
this?
RT.
Okay.
He has
Because
dementia.
I was worried that he was still alive and she just absconded with his poor emotional support rooster.
Her dad.
And this man couldn't. Okay.
And the rooster. Now, you've had chickens, right?
Yes.
And you've had a rooster.
We've had two. We had two of them.
They are not chill creatures.
Really? I mean, ours were fine. Like, they wouldn't fight or anything.
But they're loud.
They're very loud. Before we built the coop, my room was off of the back stairs, and they would perch on the back stairs, and that's where they would crow. And let me be very clear that when you see a rooster crowing in media, it's always like, oh, the sun is coming up. They crow whenever the fuck they want. It doesn't have to be 6 a.m. as the sun's rising. They'll just do it whenever they feel like it. So I wouldn't be surprised if a rooster's crowing at like 3 a.m. and then 11 a.m. and then maybe right after lunch, like
whatever the hell it wants. Now, imagine that you have paid, $400, $500 for the conference. You've flown your butt down there. You've been out partying. You drank the bar dry. There was probably a costume ball. It's late at night.
And your room is next to the rooster.
Yes. But I mean, how do you say, what do you even say to the hotel? Hi, the person who's organizing the convention has a rooster. Can you deal with it?
I mean, yeah, I guess that's all you can do.
Right? So then
all you can do.
We got an email from someone who had been an editor from 2004 to 2006 who asked that we not use their name. And this person wrote and said, I worked there as an editor from 2004 to 2006 when it was known as RT Book Club before leaving for grad school, and I edited the YA page. We were a small staff, so everyone there was an editor. There were no assistants. Kathryn Falk was not a regular presence at the magazine anymore at that point, but she did stop by every so often. So I immediately wrote back and I said, in my experience with Kathryn Falk, she was really out there and did not seem to be residing on the same earth as me. Is that your experience as well? And I also said, we just recapped an issue with Medallion Press's YA on the cover. This is the one with the unicorn. If the cover was purchased, did a feature come with the purchase, or did she have any say over who got covers in certain months? And, what were some things you liked about it? And what were you glad to leave behind? So this person was kind enough to write me a very thorough response. And it's just glorious. So I'm going to send you some text. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, this is a big paragraph, but it's worth it. You ready?
Kathryn was an interesting woman of rabid special interests. She had a large disposable income that allowed her to pursue these interests to the full. At the time I was working at RT, I'm not certain that romance novels were her primary passion any longer. She still cared about the industry and everything she'd done in and with it, but she was really not at all involved in running the magazine. She never was present at editorial meetings, and if she weighed in on decisions, she must have done so only with our more senior editors who kept her input private because it wasn't conveyed to us. She'd pop into the office when she was in the neighborhood. We were based in a little ground floor apartment-sized office in Cobble Hill at the time, and she lived in Brooklyn Heights. I think, and would come around Christmas time with gifts. Or so she lived in Brooklyn Heights, I think, and would come around Christmas time with gifts. While I was working there, she was very into emus or emu oils. That's what she would talk about when she visited. Her husband would come with her. I think she was invested in an emu oil company or an emu ranch or something like that. I'm not entirely certain about anything but the emu. Those I have never forgotten. She also had a significant collection of something quaint and esoteric in her apartment, which I never saw. Pinball machines, jukeboxes, vintage posters, something like that.
I'm not entirely certain about anything but the emu.
You can't forget.
You can't forget the emu.
No.
Now, this person also went on to say that Kathryn might have been more heavily involved in the convention planning, which was a huge year-long operation that was pretty much completely separate from the magazine, although the editors were encouraged to attend, which I think is so interesting because the editors didn't plan the conference, but you said it best. The conference was like the magazine come to life. Yeah. So they were developed concurrently, but the common theme, the common element here seems to have been Kathryn and her personality. Like you're not going to have a hanging and a costume ball and a fairy court and a Mr. Romance pageant without someone like Kathryn Falk behind it. So here we go. Here is another paragraph about answering my question. So this is the answer to my question about whether or not if you purchased a cover, it came with a feature, or if you had a feature, you got the cover, like what was the deal?
So the covers, yes, they were purchased, and yes, a story came with the purchase. I don't believe Kathryn weighed in on those decisions, but again, I wasn't party to any of those negotiations. I remember Cressley Cole's debut was a cover while we worked there.
We recapped that one.
Yeah, we did. She put her own money behind that debut, which we noted at the time. She paid for the cover rather than her publisher. I think it could happen either way. Sometimes the publishing houses would get a cover, sometimes the authors would themselves. Reviews were typically written by a freelance review staff that was separate from the magazine editorial staff, who wrote the profiles and features, but there was no pressure to review the cover novel a certain way.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Now, she went on to say, things that I remember fondly. I got the chance to interview so many excellent writers. Julia Quinn and Shayna Galen stand out. I treated my time there as a mini self-run writer's workshop. I would always ask craft questions and business of writing questions for my own benefit. I had great colleagues for the most part, stayed in touch with several of them over the years. Working in a brownstone in Brooklyn in the early 2000s was a treat. I read so much romance. The convention was a true experience where, again, I met so many romance writers. This job taught me about the generosity of the readers and writers of romance on a person-to-person level. Multiple published authors read my first sad little effort at a Regency romance, including Diane Perkins and the late and wonderful Catherine Caskey, who both gave me such thoughtful and encouraging feedback. Things I was happy to leave behind. Well, I left to go to a graduate program in the humanities, so I left the entire 9-to-5 working world behind for a good near decade. And the commute from the Upper East Side to Cobble Hill was a multi-train bear. That's all I can say. So this person worked there and shared some really good information. Then I found Lynn Connolly, I can't even say it. Lynn Connolly on Kathryn Falk wrote a blog post about staying with her. Kathryn had heard that Lynn was planning on staying in New York after the Romantic Times convention, and Kathryn just invited her to stay at her house, which terrified the shit out of Lynn Connolly, understandably. And she says, I mean, this woman could break me if she took a dislike to me, and I've never been what you might call socially ept. Most of my assumptions were wrong. Kathryn and Ken live in a beautiful home in Brooklyn. They made me more than welcome. They've been wonderful hosts, 2 new friends, despite my lack of social ept. And then this is the rest of what she wrote.
So here's the real truth about Kathryn Falk, what she's really like. Sadly, for all of you who are waiting for snark, but happy for me and others who have met her. Kathryn and Ken are 2 of the nicest people you could ever meet. With Kathryn and Ken, what you see is what you get. If she asks you something, there isn't any ulterior motive, no attempt to discover things or worm secrets out of you or do a rival down. She asks you because she wants to know. Her stories about people she has met are interesting, funny, and often far too scandalous to repeat. She's great company. She charms people because it comes naturally to her, not because it's to her advantage. She champions romance because she genuinely enjoys it and she loves the experience. I've learned a few lessons this week, and one of them is to live life as it comes and to the max.
And then in the comments, Linnea Sinclair wrote, I said loudly and clearly for a bit of time now that I owe my career to RT. When small press authors were being dissed, RT gave us a venue. When I wanted to make the jump to New York, it was at an RT convention that bestseller Robin D. Owens whipped out her cell phone and put me in touch with her agent, the lovely Deirdre Knight, who put me in touch with Kristen Nelson, who then sold me to Bantam. I owe my career to RT. And then she tells a story about how she had been doing RT conferences for at least 10 years. And her second or maybe fourth RT, there was a young woman sitting in the corner of the lobby just sobbing. And so she went up to her, and long story short, her luggage had gone missing on checkout. So she had checked out of the hotel and her luggage was missing. And she was in a panic because the hotel staff were saying, well, it's not our responsibility. So Linnea spotted Kathryn, alerted Kathryn to what was happening, that this had happened to an attendee. And Kathryn, quote, surged forth to solve the problem as only Kathryn can. Now, what does that mean? Did she throw things at them? Did she smack them? Did she throw books? Did she pass them up against the wall? Did she charm them? Like, what does that mean? I have no idea.
She called the rooster?
She called that rooster. She's like, do not make me get my rooster. So that is all of my research on Kathryn Falk, what people say about her, what people tell stories about, and what she has said too, and the media has said about her as well. And again, do not fuck with Kathryn Falk. That's why it's behind the paywall. I am fascinated because usually you only see that kind of description of, here's a story of abusive, terrible behavior. Well, she's a character and she's colorful and that's how she is. Or, she's a very passionate person. Usually you see men getting excused for their brilliance. Yeah. And here is a woman getting, permission to behave this way. But it also, to me, indicates how much power she had or communicated that she had in order for these people to be like, oh, I extend the olive branch. All of these people are like, oh yeah, she threw me up against the wall, but no hard feelings.
It does feel, unfortunately, like people who are staff, right, get the brunt of the bad side.
Yeah.
And people who are industry connections to be made are not. Like, not that she... Like the one person who wrote that, like, there's no ulterior motive. She does these things because she legitimately wants to and enjoys making connections, which is nice that it's kind of like out of the goodness of her heart or her hobby or her interest. But like, is also kind of frightening in a way, right? Like,
yeah. And when this editor pulled me aside and was like, do not mess with her, they were right. They were very right. Because that person Kathryn had been in the business for too long to put up with a young whippersnapper upstart like me. But yeah, that's what I learned about Kathryn Falk. I hope this has been entertaining for you.
I want to know if she has emus on her ranch.
I didn't see any pictures of them on the Wayback Machine version of her website, which was, Kathryn Falk, Lady of Barrow. But I definitely saw deer, chickens. There's definitely a deer in the house, like a picture of her house with a deer in it.
In one of her newsletters, she talked about goats.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely goats. Roosters, clearly. Yeah. So this has been our deep dive into Kathryn Falk. I don't have any firm conclusions, but wow, entertaining, huh?
I mean, to be honest, I feel like anyone who runs a magazine like RT and a convention like RT, you gotta be a little cuckoo bananas. Like, I don't think there's any way you could get like a sad beige mom, you know what I mean, to run something sad like that.
Beige mom.
Like a J. Crew sad beige mom.
No.
Like, there's no way.
Nope. And I'm very curious, like, how much of her own money was invested into the start of it and when it became profitable, because a magazine with over 100,000 subscribers, a convention that would pull in 3, 4, sometimes I saw 5,000 or more people to the convention. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So there you go.
What was the reason why she didn't want to do it anymore? Just because she's like, yeah, not interested anymore.
I think she was done. I mean, even the person who wrote to me was like, I don't think that this is her passion anymore. She'd moved on to her soldiers charity and other things. I think she was just sort of done with it. I mean, she was major in the miniatures area, and then she became major in romance. And I think she was just sort of like, I'm done now.
But that's really sad because and I know we've talked about it before, but in this case, she built something that employed people, that like really fostered a large community.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just kind of like a sad loss to be like, yeah, I don't want to do it anymore, and I'm not going to let anyone else do it anymore either.
But I can also understand her feeling of, I built this brand, and like so many different people said, the glue and the common element was Kathryn. So anyone who came in behind her wouldn't be as good. So she, took her brand, took her business and went to Texas and has emus. I hope there's emus. I don't know. I think she's very smart. She recognized how to give herself legitimacy by writing a book about romance authors, and all the things that she did, she did because she was interested in them and was like, I know I'm not the only one who's interested in this. But I mean, it's a really strong argument for universal basic income. Like if we all had universal basic income, imagine what incredible things we would create out of our own unique, weird, niche, passions.
Yeah.
Right? But that has been a deep dive into Kathryn Falk. Thank you for going on this journey with me. I'm so excited. I got to share all this research with somebody. So thank you.